welcome. Thank you for coming. This webinar is going to be covering two topics. One, very briefly, talking about the strategy and the positioning of a business in order to create an unfair advantage through marketing. And then the second will be on the growth machine, which executes that strategy and then evolves the strategy to create the unfair advantage that we're wishing to create through consistent and data-driven marketing. So the first part of this webinar series was covering off the strategy phase. I'll be talking about the strategy. That's the job of Elysian Fields, which is a strategy unit that works with B2B tech businesses predominantly. And my esteemed colleague here, Theo, will be talking about the growth machine, and that's the expertise of GrowthRocks. Do you want to give a minute on GrowthRocks, Theo?
No, that's fine. I will have the time to go through the growth machine, but the thing is that those two together, they work as an integral part. And, in order for us to build the growth machine without all the branding positioning and the exercise that we need to do before, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't. So that's why I see that as the next step of everything that you will present in any case.
Very good. Okay, so let's crack on. So broadly, marketing is here to create differentiation, and the problems that we tend to come across are: how do we stand out versus incumbents? How do we stand out versus competition? How can we convince people to go from an incumbent to a new business? How can we be more efficient across all of our activities? How can we deliver on our promises of growth? We work a lot with venture capital companies and private equity companies who are seeking to create growth as quickly and systematically as they can. So our activity obviously is here to accelerate and to create an unfair advantage through marketing. And what is that? Well, that's something that's insurmountable or uncopyable. What you tend to get is a head of steam, if you like, through activity. So you end up with a compounding speed and velocity that comes from consistently doing something that works, but obviously you need to find those things that work, and that's the tough bit. But when it works, when you do get that head of steam, when you do get that velocity of growth, you get disproportionate returns. So this is a partner of ours who is a venture capitalist, and Manu was talking about Revolut, which is obviously a fintech business, and he was saying because their customer acquisition cost was so low, they invested in that company versus competitors such as Monzo. So the potential for growth comes from sorting out your not just your customer acquisition, but building a machine that investors will be excited by. And what we see across all of the businesses we work with, and this is a brilliant piece of work by NFX, which is a venture capital business based out of San Francisco, is that the types of metrics that you will want to really focus on are those that demonstrate growth if you're in a venture space. But if you're not investing or looking for investment, these are still really great metrics to focus on. Now, the red ones are those that are related to or driven by customers and customer insight. So you can see anything from, what's the unit economics of the business, as in how much are you able to kind of grow and organize your own growth through understanding how the business makes money, all the way through to the obvious ones like high lifetime value. Network effects and the brand and the company name are all in there too. So as you grow, it's from the bottom up, knowing what the customers want, knowing how to acquire the customers, and then knowing how to promote the brand to more customers who want the same thing. Those are the main areas of focus for any marketing team. Now, what we do is with GrowthRocks, with Theo and Effie and the team, is we deliver services for any business, B2B business, to go from positioning activity to go-to-market plans to then building an ongoing growth machine. We'll go through the positioning and the go-to-market briefly now, which is a recap of the last webinar that we did together. And then Theo will jump onto the growth machine thinking. The use of these tools have different values at different stages. Now, in pre-revenue, you're not going to spend a lot of time on positioning and branding, but you are going to get into A/B testing pretty quickly to try to work out what works. Whereas at a growth stage, which is the later stage, when we're really looking for scaling up what works, we're going to introduce new tools, and this is the work that we do, which is such as working with agencies, suppliers, and ecosystems. So similar tools, definitely used consistently across all the different stages of business, but our focus for pre-revenue businesses is much more on just proving that there is a need and getting that initial acquisition work in place. And that's about building the infrastructure that will deliver some acquisition that should scale. Later stage, we then add the efficiency strategies, such as how do you work with an agency, keep the agency or multiple agencies working efficiently together? How do you manage multiple millions in spend? So it gets a lot more complicated as you grow, but the core tools are used throughout. The methods are the same, which should kind of give a sense of reassurance that if you go down this journey, you'll be repeating yourself as you grow and using the same tools to make sure that you can achieve a standout positioning, differentiation, build an unfair advantage through all your marketing activity, however big you get. The tools and the process can be considered as a bit of a conveyor belt. The first phase is positioning, then we go through go-to-market, and then the growth machine starts being engineered. This simple illustration kind of shows the stages from foundational insights and objectives at the beginning, which is the positioning activity, which I'll go through in a minute, through to obviously value proposition creation, and then through value propositions into go-to-market plans, and then go-to-market plans by segment, and then funnels by segment, and then optimization of those funnels by segment over time. So that's a kind of top level view. I'm going to go through positioning and then the go-to-market phases really quickly for you as a recap. So in the last webinar, we talked about these 4 foundational insights that we seek, we discover, we look out for, and we create with our clients. Those 4 are essentially based on the original vision and where the founders are going, where the business is going, the real problem the business will set up to solve, and the problem that customers tell us they're needing to be solved. The alternatives and workarounds are those things that are the ways that the problem gets solved at the moment or could be solved. And then the product's new thing, and this is the new invention that you've created as a business. Some businesses don't have these, and if they're service businesses, we end up helping kind of productize their services, which might feel like commodity services. So I'll go into these quickly one by one. The vision is always a combination of what you'd like to see and what your prospects would like to see. Where are they going? So a vision independent of prospects or customers is an academic fantasy. So the compelling vision for a business is that sweet spot between where customers would like to be going and what you would like to see and create. That takes a bit of time, and it's surprising how many technical businesses, for example, they might come from an AI or a blockchain or some other kind of expedient background, technical kind of innovation background. They don't really have a vision. Now, you don't have to create something that's so hyperbolic and so amazing that is about changing the world. You just have to think of something that, or go back into your original why. And often that why, apart from making money, is going to be about making something easier, simpler, helping people. So getting to that vision, your why, is the first step. The second part of that vision is to think, okay, what is really credible? So you can come up with your why, but then how have you been trading? What is credible about your trading? So we tend to work with businesses that have got some traction already, simply because that's the stage when you start investing in positioning and marketing. We look at, in our credibility analysis model, which is just a proprietary tool that we have, we look at the team and the traction and the business and the insights. And you'll see that these are all completely interrelated. So the team comes from the insights, or affect, their activities come from the insights and they affect the insights. The team and their experience and the knowledge affects the traction. The business, which is the sustainability of the business, not just in ESG sustainability, the trajectory of the business financial sustainability is affected by the insights and the traction. We look at why anyone should be trusting you as a vendor with their business. Investors want to know why they should de-risk the investment. And even in a B2C space, which we won't touch on particularly in this presentation, anybody spending money wants to spend money with companies they trust. So trust and credibility is a massive part of where a business is going, where it's been, and what its vision is made of. The second big area is thinking about problems. And this is classic customer development methodology, which is jobs, pains, and gains. So what job is your customer hiring the product for? What do they want to solve? It could be a problem that they feel, and it could be a problem they don't know that they have, but they're looking for solutions for something adjacent. So really understanding each segment and the jobs, the pains, and the gains, building out these job cards, and we go into a lot more detail in this space, and then critically understanding where is the customer in the journey of solving that problem, right? So what's the alternatives or the workarounds they're using to solve that problem? So what's the job they're trying to get done? What's the problem they've got? And are they actively looking for a solution? Obviously, we want to be able to sell a product. So we need people who've at least assembled a solution out of parts or have ideally a budget. Too many startups die and too many early stage businesses die because the customers haven't identified a problem such that they are looking for solutions to the problem. So you end up having to create a market, and nobody has enough money in marketing budgets to create a market. You have to find, excuse me, a burning platform, an actual problem that really needs solving now. So they'll give you your money now. That might seem obvious, but it's amazing how it can trip a lot of businesses up. When we find the problem, find the solution, we go through a bunch of processes to understand what the product's new thing might be. And you can see this color coding here as we've looked at the pains and the gains and the jobs and the market opportunity. So we look at a number of factors that might contribute to a story around the product's new thing. And the new thing has to be newsworthy. So we do think PR backwards. We think newsworthiness backwards. Why should anybody care? And always products are developed with a multitude of angles. They might have experiences, technologies, designs. They might have benefits that are clear and versus features. So we need to extract all this information. We find the core insights at the heart of the new thing, and then we put it in context with the jobs, the pains, the gains, and the market opportunity, which is the space that we found from the workarounds. So a whole bunch of jargon there. The point is that it gets pulled together very neatly. So you end up with a value proposition which is built from the jobs that people are trying to achieve, the pains they're trying to remove, the gains they're trying to seek, or they're looking to create. You can prioritize these things, and then you can get to a value proposition, which is however we describe our product and service, helps this customer who wants to get this job done by removing this pain and increasing this gain, unlike the workaround, the alternative that they're having to put up with. And that gets you to a very, not very sexy, not very exciting, but very useful description of what the product is in relationship to the market for each segment. Now that's the beginning of the process, if you like, of understanding what it is you're selling to who. The next step of the process is then to take that and think, okay, well, what's the positioning statement? What's the product in the market and why is it useful? Not just what the product is to the customer, but what is it in the market? And then for each persona, each person, group of people with similar properties that we're seeking to target, what's our provocative point of view? And the provocative point of view is that thing which helps us stand out. And we call it a provocative point of view because it doesn't have to be anything particularly earth-shattering, but it has to be provocative. So often, you know, we can come up with examples, and we're not going to go through all the case studies that we talked about in the last series, in last webinar, but there are strong and powerful and divisive statements that you can create that makes people go, huh? And, you know, from an English perspective, they're Marmite, right? Which is the famous spread that 50% of people hate and 50% of people like on their toast. The point is you need something that stands out. And if you can be a bit Marmite and be a bit provocative, you can get to a place where people get, where people notice, essentially. So that's the job that we do very quickly over a series of sessions with founders, with a bunch of desk research and qualitative interviews from customers as well. So we'd like to go and speak to customers and prospects. But we can also just do it in a day as a workshop. The output of it, and the color coding is really just to help you understand the journey. You're going to have the jobs, the pains and the gains on a page. You can have all of the competitive insight, the workarounds, the alternatives. You're going to have the product's new thing and what the product is and how it works and the transformation that the product sells. Then you're going to have your value proposition, your point of view, and your elevator pitch. And then you're going to have a strategy in a line which allows you to just brief any agency on what you stand for. So that's the output, and that's a strategic process. You want to take that then into something to distill all of that into channels. And, you know, we're using the funnel analogy here because essentially it comes down to guiding people over, say, 5, 10, 20 quality engagements through the funnel over time. Okay, so the go-to-market plan has to be very practical and simple. This is an example structure whereby you take people from not knowing who you are, you might want to track them, to engaging them over time, and then engineering delight so that they talk to other people. You can see there's other tactics and channels that you're going to be deploying. This is an example. Different channels at each stage of the journey. If you turn this on its head, it becomes the funnel. And critically, the thought leadership and the cut-through content comes from that provocative point of view. So we're not reinventing anything when we come to this stage. We're only taking stuff that we've already created in the strategy, and we're putting it into content, into ads, into webinars, into you know, CRM, newsletters, etc. An example of thinking about the attraction phase, because Theo's going to spend a bunch of time on the engagement and the nurturing and all the tactics that are going to be involved. So I just want to touch on the attract stage. When you want to get people in to how to think about you and to get a fresh idea about you, you need to produce something that cuts through. There's a useful way of framing businesses. You can frame them as in a number of ways. You could, from a brand perspective, so you can go, we're a challenger brand, or we're introducing a new category, a new reframing of what we do, or we're on a campaign against something, or, you know, there's some kind of energy there that makes people go, oh, what are those guys about? Now, it's quite useful to have a way of framing the problem. So if you can introduce the problem that your customers are suffering from, frame it in a way that makes it very clear for people to understand it, make it clear that the competitors are not solving it, introduce the new thing, the way that you're solving it, and then bring that to life through multitudes of activities. That gives you a bunch of marketing activity that will get people's attention. We've got one example with a client that we've worked on this with, that we're still kind of working through. This is a coaching platform which is very, very affordable. So it's democratizing coaching through a very clever business model that they have. Evangelizing the problem is all going to be about the fact that coaching is not available to the masses, small businesses who need it. It's only available to the elite managers. So therefore, we want to position the competitors' strengths, position them as elite, as unavailable and unaffordable. We can then talk about our new thing as solving this problem by the fact that we've made it so affordable, and the implication of that new thing. What's the future that's possible because of this affordability? So imagine if everybody had a coach. What would that do to productivity? What would it do to GDP? Imagine what would happen to self-confidence if everybody had a coach available to them. You know, how families could be guided by having people coaching the family to be more successful. How might we bring this to life? So we might want to get in front of lots of managers and help them think like coaches, so they understand and appreciate being a coach and what a coach could do and what the skills and techniques of coaching deliver. Maybe we want to go after problems that people are suffering from in small businesses. So we're targeting small business managers. Here's how coaches would solve the problem. And then maybe we want to talk about the economic impact. So the big picture of if everybody had a coach, a business coach. So you can see there's loads of creative ideas. Boom, 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 boom. It all just kind of spins off. But the first thing is you have to get to that problem, which is that coaching, in this example, business coaching is unaffordable, and we're making it affordable. So you've really clearly identified a problem and identified a new thing. So that's just an example of how these things come together. And then what happens is you produce a ton of different content in lots of different places, and you need to build it into a growth machine.
What I would like to emphasize here, and thank you for everything that you spoke about. I believe it's not just a service. What we need to keep is that it's a playbook. So, and why, you will ask, why it's important to have a playbook for this kind of stuff? And the answer is very clear. Is because talking about positioning and branding and messaging and ideal persona and all these things, most of the people, they don't understand there is a method behind. And having a playbook, it will tell you exactly the process that you will follow along the process, right? So the time that you will spend, what is needed on your end, what is needed on the other end to come up with, and all this stuff. So that's why the playbook is the most important. And here we did exactly the same, because what we agreed with Martin and Elysian Fields is, let's work in offloading our expertise after running and teaching and interviewing so many companies all these years, and let's create playbooks that will help us to actually understand what we are delivering, and also will help the clients understand what they're getting and how much time they spend in getting it. So, and that's the whole thing. What you see here is not a service, it's a playbook, right? So, and what you see in this playbook on Growth Machine, you will see 3 different stages, and we will go through the details. But in these 5 different stages, what you get is actually 2 things that are very important. The most important is timing. So you know how much time every step is taking, and then you know the deliverables. So you know exactly what we're doing in these steps, and you know why, and we build together. Now, most of the times what's happening when we start with a growth machine, the client's very keen in start changing stuff, right? Changing the website, changing the platform, changing the technology, changing the messaging, changing everything. And what we're just saying is change nothing, right? So start by creating a baseline, no changes whatsoever, not even changing the ads. We need to audit first. We need to understand where we are, right? So, and you see here, so at the end of the line, when you will end up these periods, you will see that they end up altogether in 3 months. So in 3 months, you start from zero, and then you moved into a process that is absolutely systemized. All that throughout a playbook now, or at least a set of playbooks, for that matter. So now let's agree on the important things first. Now, the principles of growth are 4, and those 4 are actually about that the thing that the topic that we need to create awareness, and we need to have people that will be top of mind, so they will be thinking of us when they have something that we could offer them. Then is, okay, assuming that we get people on the top of the funnel, which means we get traffic on our web page, right, in simple words. So what should we do with that? Is that just a vanity metric, or should we do something? And the answer is yes. We need to move them down the funnel. We need to nurture them. Why? Because at the end of the line, we need to get leads. And that's all, right? It's not about the romantic part of having users and be well-known and all this stuff. It's about monetization. It's about getting leads at the end of the funnel. And the last part is that we need to get those leads in the most efficient manner, because a lead that comes at a high cost is not the same as a lead that comes at a lower cost, right? So efficiency is key. And it's not only about the cost of acquisition or cost, CPA or CAC. It's not about that. It's actually about scalability. It's actually saying that if we manage to automate everything, if users are coming in an efficient manner, then that is something that we can scale up. And you saw what the VC guy said about Revolut, right, and why they invested. Now, because we were very lucky working with Revolut at that time, we know exactly why their CAC, why their cost of acquisition was so low, and what they were doing differently than all the others. And the answer to that is that the model of Revolut at that time, it was based on an ambassador program and an affiliate program, building ambassadors and willing to have ambassadors to do the rest for them. And they were getting a fee for every credit card and account that the user was creating. And that was a big difference at that time. All the others, N26 and the rest, they were running ads. Now here, Revolut was not running any ads, it was against ads, but affiliates were running ads as well on their behalf, on behalf of the Revolut. So it was quite a complicated model, but it ended up with an amazing cost. That's what the investors, they actually liked, right? So now, if those are the 4 principles, so the idea is, how can we create a playbook that it's actually everything, it has everything that we need. Okay, so let's work in that. And as you see, that is what we call the growth machine. And what you need to understand is that we are talking about specific stages that they all have duration. And throughout the period, we do specific things. So let's see, what do we do? What is this playbook? And people, they keep asking us, can I get the documentation? Can I get this playbook? And up to now, the answer was, it doesn't make sense for you to get the documents that we have and the templates that we use and all this stuff, because they were not part of a specific playbook. Now, everything is part of a specific playbook, even a Trello board with all the tasks analyzed, even meetings that we'll do with the customer with predefined agendas. So everything is a process now. It's not a service anymore. It's a productized service. So yes, now when you have the frame and the scope in such a detailed manner, then getting the documentation and templating is all you need, right? Because you know what needs to be done and what are the documents that will support this process. So that's what playbook means was. So the first stage is to understand about feasibility and understand if you are about to grow and if you are meant to grow. Because the truth is, not all companies are built to grow. And that's fine. That's fine. People, sometimes companies and founders, they do prefer some vanity metrics, or they do prefer becoming aware, or open up a community, or becoming famous, or this kind of stuff. So not all companies are here to grow, and it's very easy for us to understand that. So what we do in this first stage, that it just takes 2 weeks, if you remember from the time, is that we do an as-is analysis that is allowing us to evaluate the current state of the business. So, and how we do that, and what are the answers that we're getting from that is actually answers to very important questions, such as, what's keeping you from growing? Do you have the foundation for growth? What's your baseline? Where are you today? How many users you're getting in which prices? What is the sales cycle? What is the customer lifetime value? If you don't have these simple answers, so that means that is the first thing we need to start from, rather than just start implementing or changing the website and all we said. Now, in order for us to understand that, we just need one thing. As we said, it's a playbook. Everything is templatized. So we come with something which is called a scan document. It's a document of Looker. In this document, we see all the data. We connect your data in Google Search Console, Google Analytics, and ad platforms, and we get all the information we need. Then we analyze that information, and then we do a workshop together with you, a 3-hour workshop where we discuss our findings, and we'll let you know our opinion on your on what we saw in the scanning. So, and as part of this outcome, you will be able to understand your true traffic, your net traffic. I don't know if you're familiar with these terms, but true traffic is not the traffic you believe that you have, but the traffic that you actually you have. And the net traffic is that traffic that is actually minus people that did not engage, or they bounce, or they came for another reason, right? Or, for example, someone may get on your website to log in your app. That is not a real traffic. You see that as a traffic, but it's not a real traffic, right? And then you will get your Google Curiosity Index for brand awareness, so you will be able to understand what Google believes for you, for your company, and how important the brand is. And for example, one of the things that Volvo is judging the salespeople is on these Google Curiosity Index, which is actually the goal is for Volvo electric cars. And they need to understand how many people they actually search for Volvo electric cars. That is giving them the security that something is happening properly on the awareness stage. That's what we call Google Curiosity Index. It's not about the name of the company. Sometimes it's the founder, sometimes it's the brand, sometimes it's just a model of a car or a category of a car, because that's all, right? And at some point, they don't even have to deliver electric cars because they run out of stock. But when people are searching for, that is all they need to understand, because they build the awareness thing and they need to make sure of that. Now, besides that, we have a full set of algorithms that will help us to understand something that we call growth potentiality score and growth difficulty score, which it has to do with things that are happening and scores that you get in order for us to evaluate your growth potentiality. Now, what we'll get in most of the times is data that are quite missing or messed up, or some outcomes that are not the way we need them. And that's fine. That's perfectly fine. But we need to understand, and you need to understand that you don't have the data that will help us to go to the next step. We need to fix that data set first. And another thing that you may get is, we may get is that you just have data in the two edges of the funnel. So the top of funnel and the bottom of funnel. So you know how many leads you are getting, you know how many visitors you have, but then you don't know why. And you don't know what's happening in the middle. So, and that is exactly what we need to agree, that we need to build all these stages to understand the whys and where we're losing users and what we can do to not lose them. That's the thing. Now, that's the scanning document. So the scanning document alone will give us all the information we need. Now, after that, we need to start discussing about the growth modeling. And to do that is very important to align with the terminology and the definitions of the terminology. Because although it looks quite simple that we're talking about acquired users or activated users or engaged users or daily active users or monthly active users, that alone is not clear, right? So we need to understand and we need to have clear definition of what daily active users means or monthly active users or activated users. So we need to know exactly the events. And it's not something that we reinvent the wheel here. It's someone pretty successful did that before us, and that was Amazon. So actually what we did is that we cloned the business model and the business recipe of the growth recipe of Amazon, and we port that to the businesses as SaaS or services or info products or e-commerces or whatever, right? And the idea is that what's happening is that you define pillars and then you set the number that will actually identify what's happening and how successful the pillar is. So, and those pillars, they work all together. So that's the whole idea. And that's what we do, because the truth is that 90% of people, what we'll do is that we'll just start executing tactics. Let's run ads, or they will start changing the website. So these are tactics. And we shouldn't have tactics. We need to start from the principles. And that's why we said, we need to start from the recipe. So, and that's the idea here. So not to start from the tactics, but start from the principles. So the first question that we need to do is actually, which are the important elements that will help my company grow? And if we see that, you see that it could be getting more traffic, or making sure that the existing traffic is engaging with us, or making sure that we get repeated customers, or all the above, or whatever. But these are the important questions. What will make your customer, your company grow? And if you see the growth recipe, is that we will define together, and you remember the process, it's a timeline, right? So in a specific period of time, we will go through a process that we will define a growth recipe with all the pillars that we need to have so that you will grow. And the next question, when we will have the pillar, the next question is, okay, how do I measure that? How do I know the success of each pillar? And because each pillar would have 10 metrics to understand the success. It could be from a very high level one down to a very detailed one. And here, our approach in this modeling and playbook is that for each pillar, we will just have one main OKR, and we will have one or two supportive KPIs. So what is happening is that for every pillar, we come up with one metric and then two supportive. That is all. So one main metric and two supportive, 3 metrics altogether per pillar and nothing more, to understand and agree on what's happening with each pillar. And then for each pillar, what is happening is that we will sit down and we will come up with a brainstorming of the tactics. Now is the time to do the tactics, because now the tactics, and you see different tactics in different pillars, is now these tactics are actually connected with the growth recipe. Otherwise, let's change the website, let's change our product, let's add chatting. That means nothing, because normally it's not given that it will help any of the pillars you have agreed upon. Okay, so again, it's a brainstorming, And then what is following the brainstorming is actually a prioritization, because all these ideas will need to get prioritized. And they need to get prioritized. We use a very simple framework, which we call ICE, so that we understand the impact. We assess the impact of every tactic. What is the confidence of each tactic, so how confident we are that that could make a difference, and how easy it is to be implemented. So we get a scoring, and then we start with those with the high ICE score. That's all. Very simple to process and very easy to understand. And because the tactics are not all we need, we're creating the funneling, and we create, through a funneling workshop, we define how we nurture users from the different stages of the funnel, and what we need to build, and how many funnels do we need to have in order to get users. And if the question is, but why do I need a funnel? Is it my problem, my program, or my service, or my info product, love at first sight? Especially if we're talking about something, as Martin said before, very, very affordable and an amazing business model for coaching. Is that love at first sight? So I see that, I get it immediately, I will buy it? The answer is no. You need to engage again and again. So definitely you need a funnel, because the truth is, it is not something that I'm saying, it's something that most of the sales experts out there, they do say, that in order to create a sales qualified lead, it takes something like 5 to 13 different touches. So the moment you read that, it's so obvious. In order to get sales, you just need to make sure that your clients will have at least 5 to 13 touches. That's all. And that's exactly where funneling is and where nurturing comes, right? To save this thing. Now, that said, the idea is that at maximum, only 3% of the people at maximum will be able to buy at love at first sight. The rest, they need to be convinced. So there is a convincing to do. And that is exactly why we need to strategize and build the funnels together, so that you know and you are aware of how that is impacting your funnels and how that is pushing people down the funnel. Now, stage 2, what we need to do is that we need to implement those, right? We need to create all the engagement points. We need to start building the content. We need to start building emails and landing pages and ebooks and webinars and all the engagement points that you will end up having, right? That's the whole idea. We said we need at least 5 to 13 points. So which are these 5 points? Could be any of what I mentioned before. And there are a lot of easy ways of visualizing. I will not stay with that, but through the very well-known Tag Manager, you are able to send different events for Google Analytics and Mixpanel, so that you analyze all these engagement points, so that you understand what the users are doing. So you build that as well. It's in this phase, we do 2 things. We do, as part of the playbook, we do content creation, building of engagement points, and deployment of data capturing, so that we measure these engagement points. And in this phase, actually, we need more, because we need you. And why we need you? Because we want you to become a content machine. Because at the end of the line, the question here is not what every touch point will sell and what will be the call to action. The important element here is that you do everything because in this phase, because you need to build your EAT, which is your expertise, stands for expertise, authority, and trustworthiness. And these are factors that even Google is using to measure your website and your brand. So it's not about selling, it's about promoting your expertise and authority. And you need to do that through your social media, through the webinars, ebooks, every kind of engagement point that we will agree upon, they will be around EAT. Okay? Because even if, there are so many sites that they do sell cheap products, you will know you will not buy from them. But what will happen is that you will evaluate how trustworthy these sites are before buying. That's exactly what you need to build. So the product alone will never, the price and the product will never be enough for people to convert. Now, that said, we know that building content is hard, is tough, right? So that's why we say what we like writing about is one thing. What is that we can do different than others is another thing. And what is actually driving leads is a third thing. So you need to create something that it covers these three elements. So if you just write about things you like, but these things, they don't bring leads, that's not the point, right? You need to come up with the point of creating the content that it has. It encapsulates these three elements, right? And then we need to understand that we build content to cover all stages of the funnel, right? We build content to bring them on top. We bring content to nurture them. We build content to close a deal. That's the whole thing. And different kind of content is actually needed for different part of the funnels. That is all. So that's why when, for example, we create a pricing page, comparing pricing with the prices of our competitors, that as a piece of content, which is very useful and amazing, but it's a piece of content which it will go bottom of funnel. So we need to convince the user that to evaluate our product, and then we need to give him or her the information about the pricing, right? So it's a BOFU content. Now, there is a catch though here, that if you only write about top of funnel, then what you do is that you will end up educating your audience, but you're losing out on conversions. On the other hand, if you will actually just do MOFU, middle of funnel, so actually what you do is you create a funnel which is very strict, and then you strict yourself and you restrict yourself actually to people that they do know the problem that they are trying to solve. So the truth is that you need to create a funnel that it will be open enough to get those people that they believe that they could buy something, not that they're ready to buy today. And if you just write content that is bottom funnel, so actually you just create a digital brochure, and that has not a lot of value, but only to those that they actually need to buy, right? So it doesn't make sense to just create that. So you need to have all three of them so that users will get them along the way of getting everything. Now, engagement points without measurements is worthless, right? So we definitely need to measure everything. And during measurements in the beginning, and this is part of the playbook, we know that in the beginning it will be a denial. If I will ask you if you do have the data you need to run your business, your first answer is yes, I do. Well, then it may say, wow, I don't. And I'm wondering why, because I'm utilizing an agency for that or a freelancer for that and all this stuff, right? So that's why it's very important. And then we will start bargaining and saying, okay, let's start bringing some of the numbers. Or then you say, wow, I will never get the numbers I need. At the end of the line, you understand that, yes, you can have the measurements you need. Now, what is quite important here, understanding on the measurements and what we mean by insights, is actually insights will be always the joint part between qualitative data, quantitative data, and an intuition. Because anything that the numbers could tell you, if you will not combine that with intuition, then most probably you will not get into insights that they will be actionable. You will just analyze numbers, right? But you always need to understand about and put in there the quality, the quantity, and your intuition in running the business, because you do know what's happening. Now, reporting is a huge thing, because reporting something that we built in this period, and you actually need 5 kinds of reports to run your business. So you need your marketing data for your CMO. You need 1-pager for your executives. You need SEO data for everyone to see the organic part. And then you need the product and web analytics to analyze the user journey and understand what's happening in your system and answer all the whys question. And then you need advanced CRM data, because there is, when you will get on a call with a customer, you need to be very, very informed of what that user did, how many times visited it, where he's living or where she's living, in which company he or she is working, all this stuff. It needs to be part of your CRM data. That's why you need these different reports. And we have templatized everything. Your marketing reports and 1-pager with all the funneling, the SEO report, so that you see what's happening organically with you, your competition, Google Curiosity Index, everything is templatized. Even on Mixpanel, everything is templatized, from analyzing each part of your recipe. Every single pillar is being analyzed. You remember that we said about, we keep for every pillar, we keep 1 KPI and 2 supportive. Here are the numbers. And in these numbers, we are able actually to understand everything that's happening, and then dig into the details of all the user surveying and what the users are doing after each activity or before each activity. And then, of course, CRM data, same thing. You build segments, you do a lot of automations. And then why you do all of this? Because you actually need to understand how to automate things. So based on what the users are doing and based on the data that we collect, then we know what to do next. We can predict what the users will do next, but also we know enough information from the users so that we actually take care of them during the sales process. Now, stage 3, when we implement that, and while implementing that, marketing, the team is building the messaging and the positioning. And because of these things, we're now able to do an SEO strategy. Because how you do an SEO strategy without having the proper messaging, without having the proper keywords, right? That's the whole idea. It's the positioning and the messaging is actually feeding the SEO process that will run through. And now we know what kind of pages we need on the website. We know exactly what kind of clusters we need to build. We know everything, because that's the whole thing. The messaging exercise is giving us the input for us to move forward with the organic part or with a link building part, because based on the positioning, we know where we need to be published. And that's the idea behind. And with the messaging that we're getting, we run experiments, because we get the messaging, but the messaging is to come up with the one message that will make the difference, that it has the best of return, with which means that you get most of the users with a fraction of cost. That is what we need to test, and that's why we need to experiment. And now on the sales part, we know that in order for us to get leads, even through the positioning, there are 2 things that are very important: the top of funnel and the nurturing. And the question is always here in this phase, how do we do that? Should we build an amazing funnel and then start experimenting? And the answer is no, because if you just build the amazing funnel and you start bringing traffic, then traffic may prove you wrong, may prove that you build a funnel that's not converting, because the messaging is different, because a lot of things are different. So that's why you need to work hand by hand, a bit of nurturing, a bit of top of funnel. So you fix the funnel, you bring traffic. You continue fixing the funnel, you bring traffic. You continue fixing the funnel, you bring traffic. That is the way that you need to do it in order not to start throwing money and losing, just overspending for the wrong reasons, okay? Because you assume that you know where to spend, which is not the case. Now, what is quite important is that now is the time to move from the growth recipe to the growth planning. And we need both. Let's understand why we need both, because up to now, we didn't discuss about channeling, right? We didn't discuss about which are the channels that we need to engage. And now it's the time to start discussing about channeling, not before. Let alone that we're talking about persona, we're talking about and all the positioning exercise that Martin and the team will do, right? So channeling is just after that. It's not before that, because the moment that you will end up with the typical buyer persona, then the next question is, okay, I know the buyer persona, where that buyer persona is. How can I find and discover and harvest that buyer persona? In which channels? Now, then, is the time to discuss about channeling. And discussing about channeling is coming hand by hand with growth recipe and growth tasks, because actually part of the experimentation of the funneling is testing different channels. Now, what is quite important here is that you need to build the growth planning in order to control your budget, because otherwise it's the example here is like building a house without an architect being involved, but only with a civil engineer, which means you don't know if you have the foundation. If you start just running ads without having a recipe, it may work, it may not, but you will never know why. That's the point. And you don't know how will scale, because something that will bring you here will not necessarily bring you there. So it's very important to work in a very in a way that you do have a budgeting and a planning tool. Now, what's happening is that actually you put the goals, and then for these goals, what's happening is that you assume or you design the initial funnel based on the exercise of the funneling of the previous step. And then what you do is that you do actually a bottom-up approach, saying, okay, I need 10 leads. In order for me to 10 leads, this is my funnel, and this is what we did. And we believe that we may have 0.3% conversion rate, which means I need this traffic. That's how it works. From the leads, you go up to the traffic. And then the next thing is, okay, now you need to introduce channeling. So you need to understand how we move and how we split this traffic in different channels. And here it has to do with a lot of elements. For example, you may have a founder with a huge community, or you may you are part of an accelerator program, or you are in a big community altogether, or you're good in building communities, or whatever. There are so many reasons that we create a split, for an initial split for the channel. And then what we do is that we build a funnel for each channel. So let's assume that we need to bring, let's say, 100 leads, and 10% will come organically. That's very simple. That means that 10 leads, they need to come from SEO. Now, that is a funnel, because in order for 10 leads to come from SEO, you need to rank specific positions for your specific keywords. So, and you know that, and that's why you build the funnel, making sure of how you move from just keywords to those keywords that will bring you the 10 leads, and where you put the backlinks and what you do next. And so, and again, here, that is a bottom-up approach. You start from the numbers, and then you move down into rankings in this case, or you move out to impressions in terms of paid ads. That's the way it works. And then you have all this planning, and that is your budgeting tool, because you know the moment you spend $1, what will happen? And if the funnel that you believe that will happen is actually what's happening, because you may come up with the idea that your cost click-through rate will be 10%, and your click-through rate may be 0.1%. But that's the idea. because now out of the playbook, you do know that. Okay, and now the next step that you need to do is that you need to systemize that. That's all. So everything that you have done up to now, you now need to systemize, because you need to see these levers. You need to understand what's happening with the recipe and the modeling and the metrics, and you need to see your data all the time in order to do what? In order to actually come up with a new brainstorming and put new ideas in your pipeline. Then you prioritize these ideas exactly with the same process that we saw before. You analyze, you execute, you analyze the experiment, and then either you systemize, you keep it, or you stop it. Because a lot of things that you will try will fail. The only that we need to do here is that we need to give enough time for every experiment to bring results, because sometimes we don't give a lot of time, and it takes us very, we are very, let's say, positive that in very limited time, we'll get all the statistical significance for me to get into conclusions, which is not the case. It could happen, but it could happen at a high budget, right? So when we're saying about experiments, if I want that experiment to keep for a day, it could happen. Yes, I could get into conclusions in a day for an experiment, but I need to spend 5K. Spending 5K on a specific channel will give me all the numbers I need to judge in one day. That's true. But if I want to spend that amount in a period of 3 months, then I shouldn't be expecting to get it to jump into conclusions too early, because the traffic will not be enough, and the statistical significance will not be there for you to jump into conclusions. So that's the whole idea. So and we've seen in the past quite a lot of times that people, they do consider an experiment as failed because they didn't have the statistical significance to chance. But because they didn't have that, they assumed it's a failure. And that's why we do like, and that's why we always believe that there are some key elements that you need to keep. And if you see here, the number 5 is about analysis of every experiment that you are doing, even if that was succeed or failed. And why we need to do that? Because even we keep revisiting the failed experiments again and again, because maybe an experiment was failed because of other elements. So it's not given that a failed experiment we will not revisit later on. We may even bring it up and we may test again because we changed something. For example, we may run the same experiment with a different messaging. That could be a totally different experiment because it's a different landing page, it's a different message, it's a different audience targeting, most probably. So that's why we need to keep always the key elements of the growth process. And that is the last step because of the playbook. Because the moment that you have everything working and working as part of a playbook, then you need to follow that playbook. It's like, I keep saying, it's like running ISO, right? The moment that you will decide to go and implement ISO procedures, you will always have to keep and working with the ISO procedure. That's the whole idea. It's the same thing here. So we need to keep that. And that documentation will always be useful because you know what's happening, team members are changing, founders are changing, agencies are changing. So if you have everything documented, so everything that the next agency will take will be very useful because actually they will be able to understand how to continue the process rather than starting over again and again. That's the whole thing. So and these are the steps. So a period of time, full documentation, full templating, and everything in a very organized manner. that is the way that we believe that growth marketing and digital efforts in general, they could be de-risked rather than founders not understanding what's happening, why things are happening, and what are the numbers to support the decisions. So that's the whole thing, and that's why we came up with such a productized service. So it's about expectation management, but it's also about being comfortable with what is being implemented in every company, and founder believing and feeling that everything is happening the proper way. And at the end of the line, it will happen. It may take time. It may take time. It may be required a lot of experiments. I remember one founder sometime years back that we were exhausted. I personally, I had the opinion that I had tested everything and they couldn't, at that point, they couldn't grow. And they were pushing us saying, no, we didn't test everything. Let's continue experimenting and let's continue experimenting. And a few months after, we found the thing that actually helped us to grow. And then a few months later, the company has been acquired. It was a great success. And it's a success that actually told us that at the time that we believe that we have tested everything, we need to keep testing to find the one thing that will make the difference, or the more than just one thing that will make the difference. That is the growth machine. So I don't know if we have any questions. We have here our LinkedIn profiles and QR codes if we can connect, and then we can continue the discussion over email or phone or LinkedIn or the channel that you prefer. It's all about engagement in this case.
Thanks, Theo.
So something to add, Martin, as
No, I think the key takeouts I had was how, you know, the process should be built so that it is kind of automates, and that you're not lurching from campaign to campaign, that you need to work backwards from the dashboards and understand each of the different dashboards for each of the different areas. I know it's hard to pull everything into one place, but that process of pulling everything into as simplest places as possible is kind of critical. How different people within the organization need different types of information and want to help understand what's happening in the business. The bottom-up budgeting, I think, is really, really critical. So, you know, I need 10 leads. How am I going to get 10 leads? And then the experiments that we need to run for a good period of time, and not stop them prematurely, in order to know how to generate those leads. So there's so many elements of that, and I know there's a lot of tactics and a lot of detail under the hood there, which is all the engineering part of it. We talk about people, processes, and platforms, don't we? Just like the people that are working the right way, the processes for them to be following the playbooks, and the platforms, the engineers working with the platforms to try to get the most out of them. So that's what I understand as the growth machine from what you've been describing and from our work together. So I think that's a really good summary. So thanks, Theo, and thanks for today.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day, and we'll share this recording for all the people that participated and enrolled for the recording as well, because people, they do like recordings nowadays rather than just being online.
Very good.
Excellent. Thank you. Have a nice day.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.